Hello, everybody. It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And of course, if you happen to be watching NFC Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I am very happy to once again have Andy here. And more importantly, very excited about the topic that we are going to be discussing today. Andy, it's a pleasure to have you as always.
I'm really happy to be here.
And I also have to give you a tremendous amount of thanks because I completely forgot that we had this video all set up for tonight. We just got caught up in work and everything. And as a matter of fact, Cammie was supposed to be here as well, but she couldn't make it because of the fact that she just had gotten out of work when I all of a sudden got the message from Andy saying, "Hey, buddy, I'm ready to go." So you know what? The show goes on, and here we are. So today we are going to be continuing on with some discussions about the Man of Steel himself, Superman, celebrating his 85th anniversary. And I'm very excited because today we're going to be tackling a similar video that we did with the Dark Knight himself. And even though this is a Batman shirt, I don't have a Superman shirt, but this is a shirt that is very important because it is Bruce Timm based on the animated series of Batman. And of course, we're going to be talking about the Superman animated series. So, Andy, I really hope that you are ready for this conversation today.
I'm so ready for this one. I think when we talked about Superman last time, it awoken something in us. And now here we are to do more Superman. I'm very excited about this one. To talk about the animated series is great in particular. This is such an important series for me and such something that I think about in terms of how I conceptualize these characters when reading them forevermore. So I think this is going to be a great discussion today.
Absolutely. So like we did with the Batman animated series, we're basically going to discuss our top 3 episodes. I think it's going to be interesting to see if we actually share some, because that's always something fun to discover.
Yeah.
We didn't seem to do that with the Batman animated series, but who knows? Well, anyway, Superman the Animated Series was very important to me, even though I absolutely loved Batman the Animated Series. The one thing that I really appreciated about Superman was the fact that this was the show that Bruce Timm and company gave us, and it really not only opened up a whole new generation to what Superman is all about, but the most important thing that Superman the Animated Series did was it actually expanded on the DC animated universe, because through this we got things like Batman Beyond, we got Justice League, and we got Justice League Unlimited, and so many other great projects. I mean, if it wasn't for Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, Dwayne McDuffie, Alan Burnett, you know the names of these guys, we wouldn't have such a great appreciation for these DC characters. And I also feel that if it wasn't for Bruce Timm, all of the world of comic books and superheroes alike wouldn't be where they are today. I don't think we would have a serious Batman trilogy from Christopher Nolan. I don't think we would have an MCU or an attempted DCEU. So I really will say that if there was anyone that knew how to continue to keep these kinds of characters in our pop culture lexicon as iconic as they are, it's Bruce Timm and company. End of story.
Yeah. Bruce Timm is an incredibly important figure in my love of comic books. As I mentioned before, really, these creations, the Superman animated series in particular, will forever warp might not be the right word, but kind of color how I view these characters and how I think of them, kind of at their most base form. I think there's something really pure in Bruce Timm's series. And how they are generated to get to the heart of the character. I also think it's really important that they're family accessible, a great entry point. And I know for me, and for a lot of people in my age range, I'm sure, this is the quintessential DC story. When you think Superman, you think the animated series. When you think Batman, you think the Batman animated series. Go watch our discussion on the Batman animated series if you haven't. But I'm very excited to talk about this one, because even though I haven't watched it as recently in its totality as I have the Batman series, I did get caught up on this for today to talk about my favorite episodes. And it's really good. It stands toe to toe with it. And also, might I add, just looks beautiful. it's also definitely kind of like the design of Superman in my mind.
Well, that's one of the few things that was so interesting about Superman the Animated Series, because when you take a look at the history, and Bruce Timm has said this in many interviews, he's like, it was somewhat of a gamble to bring Superman to this world, because
Yeah.
you take a look at what they had already done with Batman. So we're literally going into the polar opposite. It's bright, it's vibrant, it's colorful.
And it
Even,
works.
yeah, and it works. Even the thing that I love the most about this series is I didn't even know about half of Superman's villains, maybe even 2/3 of Superman's villains, maybe even 3/4 of Superman's villains. And that's only because of the fact that when you take a look at all of the times that Superman had been brought to visual media, whether it was in television or if it was in movies or even in video games, they could never seem to go beyond Lex Luthor. Maybe sometimes they tried, thanks to Hanna-Barbera. You got Brainiac from time to time. You even got a character like Toyman or Bizarro, but you were never able to dive deep into this world. And as far as I'm concerned, he has a very intriguing bunch of supervillains to his rogues gallery. And the thing that I love so much about them, even the ones that Bruce Timm and company created, because once again, like they did in the Batman animated series with Harley Quinn, they gave us some brand new characters like Livewire and Luminous. So it is amazing how each and every single one of these villains knows how to find the vulnerabilities in Superman in various ways. And I think that's why this show is great, because it didn't make Superman invincible. They still kept him as the big blue Boy Scout, but they did actually show us that his villains could go toe to toe with him, and he is not unstoppable.
Right. And that's what we were talking about in our previous episode, talking about Superman kind of as a whole. It's a tough nut to crack sometimes, creating stories that are action-packed while giving him something actually difficult to overcome, and the ways that you go about doing that. I think the animated series is incredibly thrilling and really fun, and has a lot of great stories that put some serious challenges in front of Superman. And I think the power scaling is done well for that reason. But you're right. He is as good as his rogues gallery. And as we've alluded to in the past, while it's not Batman, Batman does continue to have the best rogues gallery in my opinion. This shows that they can stand toe to toe, and there's some pretty great villains who might or might not be featured in my favorite episodes. We shall see.
Okay, so one of the few things that I didn't think you knew, Andy, so we're going to go into our top 3 episodes. I want to make it clear that if your episode happens to be one of a 2-parter, the entirety is included. So 2 episodes, 1 story, that's an episode as far as I'm concerned.
So I agree. Without spoiling things, that actually doesn't impact my list. But when thinking through how I would go about this, I would have handled it the same way. So I'm picking up what you're putting down. I have a feeling, I have some thoughts on what that might mean about your list, but we shall see.
Okay, so let's start with our number 3. What is your third in your top 3 episodes of favorite Superman the Animated Series?
So this is almost embarrassing to say after how we started the episode, but I thought about my 3 favorites. It was a little difficult to order them, but my third, I'm going to say, is Nighttime.
Oh, stop. It's mine too.
Is it your third too?
It is. It is. So how funny is it that we actually include Batman in our list? No.
That's why I'm embarrassed about it.
There's nothing embarrassing about it, because I think it's probably one of the most brilliant episodes of the show.
And let's be clear, it's a Superman story.
Absolutely.
Yes, it gets, and it's so lame because I was just talking about the Rogues Gallery. Yes, it's cool that we get to see Batman's Rogues Gallery. We get to see Superman interacting in Gotham City. We get a little bit of Robin. We get but you know, the thing that elevates it for me is that it really lets us see Superman as as the detective and the problem solver. And
Yeah.
so beyond just throwing punches, and there's some funny beats in this episode too that I think is really important to mention. But beyond all of that, we get to see Superman being the thinking hero, which he is. But I think that that gets downplayed sometimes since Batman is the detective, right? So watching how Superman fills that role, I just think that this is a phenomenal episode and a really, really cool crossover.
Oh
And
yeah. I mean, yeah.
something that was just truly, if not revolutionary, still early in bringing this kind of thing to the screen. The kind of crossover shared universe of comics thing is so core to how we think about comics and comic stories now. But this is cool to get to see Superman in
Well,
this world on the screen.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the truth of the matter is the crossovers in the animated world and superheroes was definitely not something that was new at this point in time,
Right.
because you have to remember we had the Super Friends many
Hmm.
years before that. And even before Superman the animated series, we did actually see Spider-Man cross
Hmm.
over with the X-Men on the Marvel end.
Right. Right.
But you're absolutely right,
It's the
because
universes. That's more what I mean
absolutely,
because it's
because but that's the thing. Superman was the show alongside expanding the DC universe in regards to adding new shows. This was also the series that launched the shared universe, because if you think about it, there were no heroes outside of the characters that are closer to Batman's role, because I know that in Batman the animated series he did encounter the Demon. There was a flashback episode where he talks about Jonah Hex,
Mhm.
but there was never an episode where he interacted with a Superman or a Green Lantern or an Aquaman. It was Superman that gave us the shared universe where he was actually alongside other heroes. And of
Mhm.
course, you had Batman and Superman World's Finest, which was when they had Batman and Superman team up against Lex Luthor and the Joker. So
Right.
this was another crossover, but you're absolutely right. It may be one of the dumbest ones, but you want to know what's really funny? It's the ultra lighthearted
Yep.
episodes that are personally to me some of the best.
Hmm.
I love how Superman tries to be a hero in a world that is so unlike
Yep.
Metropolis. I love how he interacts with Tim in the
Hmm.
show. And my favorite part of the show is when he shows Robin how he can change his voice pitch, and
Yeah.
then he sounds like
Yeah.
Robin, and that makes you laugh so much. But yeah, he goes toe to toe with Batman's Rogues Gallery, and man, does he surprise them!
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really, and I think you're exactly right about it's fun to fish out of water story, because in highlighting the differences between the two characters, it really shows us what makes Superman great and why there's room for this show alongside the Batman animated series to be talked of as a truly great DC animated series. And yeah, you're right. The humor in this is great. He's been working out. He can just do a little bit more than before, you know.
Yeah, just the whole concept of Superman putting on a bat suit.
Yeah,
The,
it's
the thing that the part that really surprises me is the fact that Batman's suit does actually manage to fit Superman.
yeah.
Because as far as I thought, I swear to God, I thought that Superman was a couple of inches taller than him.
Hmm. Hmm. That unlike that Frank Miller like chunky design, I think Batman is probably a little smaller in the Bruce Timm universe.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. It's a charming episode.
Hmm.
That's the word that I would probably use to describe it. It's just such a fun, enjoyable episode. You'd never think about that episode if you crossed it a couple of times, but it's so funny because as I watch the show, it's like a fine wine. It gets better with age, as does
Yeah,
all of Bruce Timm's work.
yeah.
And every single time I watch the Superman series, particularly Nighttime just keeps climbing the ladder because it's just one of those truly
Hmm.
enjoyable romps, because that's
Hmm.
exactly what it is.
Yeah, and it's especially fun to get that lighthearted story in the Batman universe. So beyond using it as a foil, showing what makes Superman different, it's It's an avenue for that lighthearted humor that you wouldn't get without Superman there. So
Okay.
I think it's a really great episode. It's my
All
number 3.
right. All right. So now I'm getting really scared because if we actually end up having the same number 2, it's going to be
I'm
very, very
so
frightening.
let me just say something before we move on then. When you give your number 2, if it were my number 1, should I say that?
I would hope that you would probably do so, but I have
Okay.
a feeling that our
Okay.
streak is going to be snapped
I think that's probably right.
because you kind of gave me a little bit of a spoiler there, and that
Okay.
was you don't seem to have any two-parters as a top.
So I think we're gonna get to talk about some different episodes that are very fun then. Okay.
Okay, so
Cool.
my second favorite episode, and it's really funny because of the fact that, if I were to talk about probably the most brilliantly written episode of Superman the Animated Series, like really sticks with you, it's Apocalypse Now.
Okay.
But believe it or not, my second favorite episode doesn't even involve Superman that much. It's Little Girl Lost.
Interesting.
I love that episode, that
Yeah.
two-parter episode.
Yeah, I when I hear you talk about two-parter episodes, I thought you were going to go with Apocalypse, but I mean, look, there's time.
I have to. You can't talk about Superman the Animated Series and not talk about Apocalypse Now,
fair enough.
especially how that two-parter ends.
Fair enough. But Little Girl Lost, let's focus on this.
Yeah, A Little Girl Lost is such a great episode because it introduces us to Supergirl, of course, voiced brilliantly by Lauren Tom. And what I love so much about it is the fact that Superman takes a back seat in this episode.
Mhm.
This is really about the Superman series coming right off of the heels of Apocalypse Now, because it's like Superman just came face to face with a truly powerful equal, possibly someone that's even more powerful than him in Darkseid. So after suffering the loss of Detective Turpin at the end of part 2 of Apocalypse Now, everybody, this basically means get off your asses and watch Superman the Animated Series. You are going to be blown away by what you see in Apocalypse Now, and this is the kids show we're talking about. But how do you come out of that? Well, you give Superman a helping hand. You give him an equal in Kara. So Kara shows up. She's raised by Ma and Pa, and of course she is a typical teenager, wants to get out there in the real world, and once she officially makes it to Metropolis, she wants to get into some crazy trouble and adventure. And of course, with the help of Jimmy, it turns out that Apocalypse has not officially been through, and we also get, this is the reason why I love the episode so much, it's because we get introduced to Granny Goodness, voiced beautifully by Ed Asner, because that is still one of the most ingenious ideas. Talking about a casting choice for the ages, when Andrea Romano says, I want Ed Asner to voice this old woman from Apocalypse, Granny Goodness, and not just that, show just how powerful this character is. It's incredible. And then, of course, you get introduced to the female Furies, and that's just a crazy, crazy fun action sequence. Again, it's a dark time because of the fact that we just had Apocalypse invading, but here's a little bit of a lighthearted story to break through with the darkness with Apocalypse, thanks to Supergirl.
And I'm trying to think, because I didn't watch, like I said, it's been a while since I've watched the entire series. I'm trying to think about, since it's been a little while since I've watched the full series. I'm thinking a lot about Supergirl's role in the series as a whole. Really, when you start talking about this, I start talking about her importance to the continuity. I think about Justice League Unlimited. I think about appearances in Batman. I think it's really, I think that this is an important episode for that reason too, because it goes back to what I started the conversation before we went into specific episodes, is this series really impacts how I think about these characters, period. I know part of it is because of the shared continuity of Bruce Timm's stuff, but the other part of it is just that I like this version of Supergirl. This is kind of what I think of. So this makes it an important episode for that reason, and one that stands out, or 2 episodes.
that you could definitely tell that Greg Berlanti took a lot of these mannerisms of Supergirl and gave them to Melissa Benoist for the live action show. Because when I watched the first 2 seasons of Supergirl, it felt like I was watching the Supergirl from the Bruce Timm show.
This is what you're thinking. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, she is an excellent addition in Bruce Timm's world. And you're absolutely right. Knowing that this is the beginning of what a crucial role Supergirl has to play in the DC animated universe. It's such a great, fun, in-your-face launching pad for a very deep character that you never would have expected. I mean, like, I still remember when Justice League Unlimited started its run and how big Supergirl's. I mean, if there's one thing that I have to give Bruce Timm credit for, and it's one amongst many things that I give Bruce Timm credit for, he will take some of the most unexpected characters and turn them into something important. I mean, like, for the love of God, I had no idea who the hell the Question was until I watched Justice League Unlimited. And I freaking love the Question, especially in Bruce Timm's world.
But I think it really highlights what we were saying about the importance to the Superman character of the characters that are around him. Because look, Supergirl can stand toe-to-toe with most anyone. This is, that's fine. But what I mean to say is that we talk a lot about stakes being raised by Superman caring for others, how Superman fits in or doesn't fit in. And like the dynamic that he gets to have with Supergirl is largely and wholly unique. So I think that it's an important part of the Superman character too, because it's funny, you said you're picking an episodes that doesn't have as much Superman in it. But I think it's absolutely critical for the character moving forward, the introduction of Supergirl.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why Bruce Timm is such a great creator, because he gives true meaning and depth, and more importantly, screen time for supporting cast members.
Very true. Very true.
And I think, because you grow to love all of these characters and not just the main character that's in the title name.
Exactly. And I think we will probably see that in some other episodes we discuss. But yeah, I think that's the beauty. As you said, getting to care about characters that maybe before the animated series hadn't gripped you in any way, breathing life into them. I think that's the magic of the series.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't even read much Supergirl in comic books, but I still will always say I do enjoy Supergirl. And Bruce Timm is the reason why. And it's not just the Superman animated series and all the animated series. Like, I love Supergirl in some of the DC animated films that were direct to DVD and Blu-ray. I've watched many of them in which Supergirl has a crucial role to play, and I always appreciate when she's there.
Agreed.
So what is your number 2?
So my number 2, again, I had to think about it. The difficulty was ordering these. But I don't know if this one will surprise you or not. But my number 2 is Stolen Memories. So this is the introduction of Brainiac. And the reason that this is my number 2 is that Brainiac has come up in our discussions about Superman before. I love Brainiac. And I love Brainiac as a villain for Superman largely because of this episode and the animated series. When I say that the portrayal of characters in this series impacts how I view them kind of forever, Brainiac is the quintessential example of that. I think the kind of the writing of the character to tie his origin directly with Krypton, and to make it more of a personal connection to Clark is a really, really smart choice. And I think it gives Brainiac this kind of, I mean, I would always consider Brainiac like a tier 1 main antagonist, not Lex Luthor, but like a really important and recurring villain for Superman. For me, Bruce Timm's Brainiac is the best because of that kind of personal connection he gets to have to Clark. I also think the episode's really fun. I think there's some really cool stuff. It's an early episode in the series, so we get to see like the genesis of the Fortress of Solitude, which is super cool in this episode. But yeah, so I don't know if you have thoughts on this one.
Well, I
but
do,
it's definitely my number 2.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, another reason why Brainiac truly stands out, particularly in this series, is due to the brilliant voice work
Yeah.
from Corey Burton.
Yeah.
I mean, again, they gave us the correct voices to go with these characters. I mean, even though Superman did go through voice changes from one series to another, you love him when Tim Daly voices him. You love him when George Newbern voices him. So it's impossible not to appreciate the voice acting in these shows. And I mean, Clancy Brown was an incredible Lex Luthor. Corey Burton was an unbelievably good Brainiac because he gave us the emotionless, soulless voice that Brainiac is. Also, it was very interesting to see how Brainiac was used in this series to begin with, because I loved how Bruce Timm not only gave a connection of Brainiac to Superman, but also really showed how deep the connection was by having Brainiac be the central computer system of Krypton. That is something that a lot of writers and artists in the comic book world would use to their advantages, thanks to Bruce Timm. It's not, and that's another thing. We're in a world right now where a change is made and everybody goes, you know what? But when Bruce Timm does it, he does
Everyone's
it
like, oh yeah,
all the right ways. He's like, oh, Brainiac is the supercomputer central system of Krypton. That makes sense.
It's just great writing. It works. It creates a personal connection. It elevates the villain. It doesn't just make him a threat because he's super smart. It makes him a threat because he's got this kind of really core tie to Cal and his life. I love the change, and you're exactly right. When Bruce Timm does it, it's cool.
Yeah, because that's one of the few things that I don't think we've ever actually said this about any of Bruce Timm's work. None of Bruce Timm's stories are based on comic books.
Which is rare in the comic, I want to say adaptation world, but it means a different thing.
He was basically writing new comic book stories for all these DC titles.
He was creating his own mythos and his own shared universe. It's really, really something crazy. But yeah, and then of course we've talked about this before in the Batman series. We've talked about this a little bit already in Superman, forever then changing how other writers approach the character, because they just see that and they go, that's great, that works.
Yeah. And also, I'm really surprised we actually do share a connection between our top two favorite episodes, because not just Supergirl, Brainiac is a character that became a much larger piece of the DC animated universe, because one of my favorite Justice League episodes is the one where Brainiac is connected with Darkseid in Justice League. I can't remember the name of the episode off the top of my head, but if I were to give you one of my top 5 episodes of Justice League, not Justice League Unlimited, but Justice League, that would have been one of them. And I also love how Brainiac culminates at the end of the second season of Justice League Unlimited with Project Cadmus. Like, that was like, you didn't see it coming,
Exactly. No, and this is the reason why I love Brainiac and think of Brainiac as that high-tiered villain. Also, I really like Lex Luthor in this episode too. It is a great episode. I want to talk about that too. I think that the story is really well done. I think we get to have some emotional beats with Clark that are really interesting and really work. I already alluded to the kind of fun Easter egg about the Fortress of Solitude, which kind of elevates it for fans, I think, too.
Yeah.
But it's not just the introduction of the Brainiac character. It's that it's done in service to a really good story. And I think it's a phenomenal, like, core Superman episode. And not to tip my hand too much about the next one I'll talk about, but Nighttime is, for lack of a kinder word, a little bit of a gimmicky episode. And this one to me feels like Superman animated series. This is what the show is. This is a, like, bread and butter Superman episode. So for that reason, it elevates it. Well done, great introductions. It checks every box.
Okay, so what is your number one?
My number one, and I was wondering how you would think about this, or if it would be on your list anywhere. But my number one is the late Mr. Kent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So I just said gimmicky episode, nighttime, like a little bit different, a little bit experimental comparison. So late Mr. Kent is certainly a different episode. There's a lot to it that is. It's funny. I talk about how nighttime is cool because you kind of get to see Superman as the detective. You definitely do in the late Mr. Kent, and kind of the research skills, and the investigative skills of Clark. Um, I think it's great for a lot of reasons. I think it's that noir feel and that like kind of narration style sets it apart and makes it really interesting and fun to watch. Um, I also think that it goes into a little bit of what we said in our conversation the other day about Superman. It becomes clear how important Clark Kent is to Superman. And at the core, the conflict in the late Mr. Kent isn't solving the mystery, it's the importance of the Clark persona to Superman, and how desperately he wants to be able to retrieve it somehow, and how much loss he feels at the idea of it going away. So I think it's a phenomenal episode. I know it's a little offbeat, but I think it's incredible.
Yeah, that's an episode that I really do not remember much of. I need to revisit that one because
Sure,
I know the title. I know the
sure.
title, and I'm just glad to know that your number one episode was not Unity, because that I think is the worst episode of the series. I hate that. That episode is just so unsettling. So I'm
Well,
glad it wasn't your number one.
I think you'll actually, it's great that you don't remember this one that well, because it's a really fun one to get to come back to and kind of experience whole cloth, with a roughly unspoiled eye. I'm sure it'll come back to you because it is a great episode. But yeah, it's and really to drive it home, it's that noir style that I think
Yeah,
is really, really particularly cool about it. And I talk about why I like Stolen Memories so much as that bread and butter Superman episode,
absolutely.
because it allows me to say I like this one so much because of how it subverts the norm of the series while still being clearly Superman and showing us what he can do. And it's funny because, I say it shows the importance of Clark Kent to Superman in his loss, but really kind of the investigation that goes on feels more to me like Clark Kent, the reporter, who we don't think of that much. We think of Clark Kent, the family man, we think of Clark Kent, the caring person, but we don't really think of Clark Kent, the guy who has the day job, right?
Yeah,
And I think late Mr. Kent is really cool for that reason, in that it's skills that are not Superman skills. It's not nighttime detective work, but it's investigative reporter detective work, and I think that's super cool.
right, right. No, I got to revisit that one because there's so
Definitely.
because that's the thing. You love a show and you love it backwards and forwards, but there's always that one episode or two episodes that always just slips under the radar and you
Mhm.
completely forget about them, you
Yeah,
know?
and you know what? It's funny. You were even just saying that it's the kind of show that benefits from rewatches. That when you go back to Bruce Timm stuff, you discover things you didn't notice the first time. You have a newfound love for it. It's like a fine wine. It gets better over time. I'm uh I'm actually thrilled that after this conversation you get to go watch that episode and like take it seriously and
Well, it's not like
keep.
I never took them
No, no,
seriously.
no, but I mean to really like sit with that one and think this is one of the greats, isn't it? Yeah, I think you're gonna really enjoy yourself.
Yeah. So I'll give you my number one, but I
Yeah.
have a strange feeling you already know what it is.
Okay.
Okay.
It's
My number one is going to and forever will be Mixel Pixelated.
okay. So I think you might have mentioned that in our last discussion because I went into today thinking I'm pretty sure that's your favorite episode, and I don't know if you told me or if you
Well,
told me and the camera. But there's a number of reasons why that makes perfect sense for you. But please tell us it's your favorite. Go ahead.
it's because like the Riddler being my favorite Batman villain, Mr. Mixie-Spitlick is my favorite Superman villain because of the fact that all he wants to do is outsmart Superman. Not to mention the fact that this is a true story. So I started watching Superman the Animated Series when it first aired in 1996. But because of when it was airing, I wasn't able to watch a lot of the episodes. So there were a lot of episodes that I didn't actually see until they were in syndication. But I remember when season 2 was out, I actually was able to find some time to watch some episodes. So I watched Mixed-Pixelated when it first aired.
I'm not even going to attempt to say it, by the way.
And then I hear that big introduction line, "Hey, have you seen McGurk?" Like, the minute I heard that, right off the bat, I knew that was Gilbert Gottfried. And I was like, who is this character?
Yeah.
And I just remembered laughing the entire time. That is the only episode in the entire animated series that I will be constantly rewinding my DVD to watch other moments that I just want to watch again, because they're just it's so out of this world. The fact that we get introduced to this tiny little man from the 5th dimension named Mr. Mixie-Spitlick, and he is abstract. He is kooky. He is off the walls hilarious. But it's amazing how he is such a threat to Superman because of how powerful he is. And the best part is, the only way that Superman has to defeat him is by not even using his powers at all. He has to use his wits. He has to use his brain. And that is why it's such a great contrast when it comes to hero meets villain. It's such a great dynamic. But just having Gilbert Gottfried voice this character, it's a shame that it's amazing to know that today, as we're recording this video, we are living in a world without Gilbert Gottfried and Paul Reubens. That's unreal.
It's, and like, pour some out for a real one. Gilbert Gottfried, we talked about perfect casting in this show, and how the casting has brought to life so much of what this series became. But Gilbert Gottfried is wonderful here. And also, I am now thinking, yeah, that's probably why I knew this was either your favorite or on your favorites list. I don't think that's the first time I have heard you deliver the opening line of the episode.
But it's not just that. It's also the beauty of the animation in that in that episode, because we actually get to see the 5th dimension. We get to see that Mr. Mixie-Spitlick lives in the 5th dimension in an apartment with a woman. I'm not even gonna try and figure out her name. It's one thing to try and pronounce Mr. Mixie-Spitlick, and it's a different thing to try and pronounce his wife. So I'm just gonna call her by the nickname he gives her, which is Gispy. So you've got Gilbert Gottfried alongside the voice of Sandra Bernhard. I mean, that is gold in regards to dynamic and casting of a husband and wife. It is so amazing to just see those two together. I can watch the two of them bicker for hours because it's just so much fun to watch. And I just love all the ways that Mr. Mixie-Spitlick comes into Superman's world and tries to find ways to outsmart him. And it's amazing that every single time he comes back, it's amazing how Superman truly knows what he has to do, and how he actually outwits him is even funnier. But I still remember there's this one scene that is hilarious, because Superman is very upset at work because he knows today is the day. And then Lois comes into the office and says, "Rough day?" He goes, "Yep." And then she's talking about how she hates when family from out of town comes over, and all of a sudden a penguin just waddles across the office, and she stops and goes, "Was that a penguin?" It's like penguin? The delivery of that line by Dana Delaney is laughable to no ends. It's such, I'm sorry, all 3 of my episodes have a common theme. They're fun, they're lighthearted, and they're just nonstop on your toes. You got to catch every minute of it. But that's a reason why I love this episode so much, because it's truthfully, I think, the most fun I have with this series.
And that is the heart of the series, right? It's It's well written, it's well composed, and there's a lot of great writing that goes on like throughout when the characters. It's a light-hearted story by comparison to some other superhero stuff, and I think that shows. And look, I picked a couple of rather serious episodes on my list, right? But like I did pick nighttime. And so I understand, I feel that same pull. It's not that the only episodes worth watching are those serious or dark or actiony ones. I think that it's a true something for everyone. And I think that this is a great, great, great episode to spotlight the lightheartedness, the humor, and I didn't watch that one before today, even though I knew that that was going to be one that might get talked about. So I'm extra excited to go back and revisit that one, if not tonight, probably tomorrow.
Yeah, I think we both
But
need to rewatch our
there's a
respective
few
number
episodes.
ones.
There's a few episodes on my list. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I'm now sitting here thinking there's no way I'm going to be able to resist watching the entire series, which is fine. That's a good problem to have. But this is truly a phenomenal episode, and I'm glad it's on your list because it's a fun one to talk about.
Yeah, and I've also got to say that the most important thing about loving this episode is that I've learned something from it, and that is I know how to say Mr. Mixie-Spitlick backwards. I know that the way you spell his name backwards and pronounce it is Kill Tipsy's him. Like, I never would have thought that if it wasn't for the show. And it's one of my favorites because it's just the casting, the atmosphere, the extreme fun that you see. That's one of the few things.
Yeah.
Batman the Animated Series is a great show, but you rarely get that true element of fun. I mean,
Yeah.
you get it with Mark Hamill's voice as the Joker, but it's a completely different kind of
Different
fun.
kind.
It's like with the Joker, you have a great time, but you're watching this guy and you're like, oh, this guy is completely out of his mind and he's probably going to kill someone in 2 seconds, but I can't stand how deliciously evil he is, and he cracks me up to no avail. But Mr. Mixie-Spitlick, he's not going to kill Superman. He's not going to kill anybody. If anything, he's going to turn a whole bunch of people into various animals in a zoo, in a menagerie. But that's all he's going to do until Superman beats him with his wits. That's the only thing you're going to get from this character. And don't even get me started on the episode where he teams up with Bizarro. That's also a great and fun episode.
And I think what you're getting at, which I'm agreeing with wholeheartedly here, is that there's a lot of fun to be had in the DC animated universe and these series, but there's joy to be had in the Superman series, and that's kind of the clarification that I think can distill what we're talking about when we talk about the Superman series. This episode is full of joy, and I think a lot of the episodes we talked about tonight, at the very least, have moments of it. They were made with love, they were made for a reason, and they are infinitely revisitable and really timeless for people who are new to discovering Superman because of that joy. If you ask, what is there in the character to grip modern audiences to make Superman remain relevant, to be someone that you actually read as opposed to just the quintessential superhero you think about, this is the way to do it. This is the joy. This is the Superman that I think of. This is a wonderful series. And I think the episodes you were talking about, particularly this one right now, are a great distillation of that.
Absolutely. Well, I will definitely say that this was definitely a fun conversation. And it was great to reunite with you to talk about another series of the Bruce Timm DC animated universe. It's amazing to know that in just 3 short years, this show will be 30 years old. It's insane to even think about that. But it's also amazing to see, like Batman, the animated series, how this show stood the test of time, how it's amazing when you take a look at television shows, especially in the world that we're living in right now, where you can purchase an entire series on physical media, or you can binge watch a series on a streaming service. Not every show is something that people will go back to. Like, I know that there are people out there that will watch the entire series of MASH. There are people that will
Yeah.
go and watch the entire series of Seinfeld. There are people that will even go and watch newer shows in its entirety, like Game of Thrones or The Big Bang Theory. But when I take a look and hear things about sales and what is it that the audiences out there are buying, one of the series that has made the most money in physical media sales is Superman the Animated Series, as well as a lot of the other Bruce Timm animated series. And that says a lot, because this just shows you that it was something that connected with a vast audience. It was great animation. It was excellent storytelling. They were perfect packages. And there's no way that someone can come up to me and say, you're wrong. Because if you actually come up to me and say you're wrong, I'd like you to tell me how.
And I think going to why that is the case, it's the timeless nature of the show. People who watched it love it. People who want to introduce, look, that's how I'm going to introduce my son to Superman. Like, it just is, right? It's such an amazing series, and you can see why people come back to it time and time again. So I would encourage people watching this, if you've seen the show, go back to it. If you haven't seen the show, you can pick it up. It's on Max. You can grab a physical copy easily enough too. So this is an important one to have around, and it's always going to be relevant. There's always going to be room for Bruce Timm Superman.
Absolutely. And I would love to hear from you all in the comments. I mean, do you agree with what we chose? Are there episodes that we overlooked? Because even though certain episodes were not in our top 3, we clearly threw out a bunch of honorable mentions and even some dishonorable mentions.
Yeah.
I mean, I will also say that I'm glad to know that an episode that didn't show up in either of our top 3 was The Main Man, because that episode has gotten really, really stale over time. And it's just reminded me about how much I hate Lobo. I really do not like that character at all.
Well, look, just because there's some that are misses for us doesn't mean that the series is torpedoed over it.
if the rumors are true and Jason Momoa is going to trade in his dorsal fins for a leather jacket with no sleeves and chains in the DC live action universe, if there's anyone that could truly make me appreciate Lobo, it's Jason Momoa as Lobo.
Exactly, 100%. I will be there day one.
He is he. You know something? It's kind of funny, because when people were starting to talk about how he could possibly be Lobo, I'm looking at Jason Momoa without any makeup, and I'm like, yeah, that's Lobo.
Yeah, I could see it.
Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. And of course, speaking of Superman, it's great to wrap it up on a high note. So, Andy, it was a pleasure talking Superman the Animated Series with you. I'm pretty sure there's going to be at least another Superman discussion video on the channel. Yeah. And I'm really hoping that we can get Cammie here, because I know that Andy really wanted Cammie to be here, as did I. But Cammie will be back soon, guys. If you haven't watched her and mine discussion about the Boom Studios book, Alice Ever After, it is going to be showing up soon. And Cammie and I will be back for our latest episode of the DC Animated Live Show, discussing all the latest DC animated films that came directly to Blu-ray and DVD. But everybody, thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it, and we will see you in the next one.
See ya.